Hello everyone, this is the Insider Threat Podcast, an ISO 3103 1980 compliant show where we explore issues with the human factor and its impact on security and business. I'm your host, Steve Higdon. In this episode, we cover whistleblowers, insider threats, a naughty college student, and more. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back. This is episode 33 of the Insider Threat Podcast for the week of February 12th, 2018. So it's just a couple days before Valentine's Day, and luckily I've got pretty much everything sorted out. Well, not everything, but enough that I feel comfortable right now anyway. How are you guys doing with that? And if you're single, that's okay too. Just think, you have much less work to do during this time of the year. So on that note, and this is a follow-up from last week, I suppose, how many of you have done your taxes? Be honest here. If you have, that's awesome. And if not, what are you waiting on? We already said last week that doing your taxes early is one of the best ways to make sure that you aren't cheated out of your tax return during this season. Believe me, you're not going to magically find some crazy deductions in the very last minute that you can apply to your taxes. Hopefully you've been keeping track of everything, as you go throughout the year, so that it's easy when tax return season comes, and then you can just do it early, like I said, and be much safer that way. Now, I'm really excited. If you're listening to this on the 12th of February, that means we're halfway through the month before BSidesNoVA comes around. This is just the second year that BSidesNoVA has actually been in existence, and I'm lucky enough to say that I volunteered last year, and I'm volunteering again this year. I'm hoping that I'll get a speaker wrangler spot. That's really my favorite thing to do because I get to talk to all the speakers one-on-one and make sure they're ready and ease their fears and their anxiety about going on to speak. But at the same time, I get to learn a ton of stuff from these people. So I'm really blessed whenever I get to be a speaker wrangler at these conferences. So if you're in the area, remember BSidesNoVA is February 23rd through the 24th, and I hope that I get to be there both days. I might just be there on the 24th, but we'll see. It really depends on what's going on in the Insider Threat Podcast household during that weekend. But as with all of these events that I go to, if you see me, please stop me and talk to me. I'd love to have a conversation with any of you about Insider Threat, I don't know, the weather, how crazy it's been over here lately, whatever you want to talk about. I love talking to listeners, especially one-on-one like that. And that's really all I have for the announcements, so it's time for your Infosec Trivia Question, where Google is king and the prize is non-existent. The question last episode was, in the 1960s, someone was able to get away with creating fake checks, pretending to be a lawyer, a doctor, an airline pilot, a security guard, and an agent from the U.S. Bureau of Prisons before finally getting caught at the age of 21. Who was this person? The answer was Frank Abagnale Jr. I don't know if any of you saw Catch Me If You Can, but it was a pretty good movie, and it was based on Frank Abagnale's exploits. The crazy thing, to me anyway, is how young he was throughout all of it, and he was able to get away with it for so long. Congratulations to David from Massachusetts, Marcel from Glenroy, Kyle from Toronto, and Leon from Holtville for getting the correct answer. Here's your question for this episode. In 1925, Victor Lustig traveled to Europe and landed one of the most memorable sails in recorded history. What did he sell? Send your response to infosecanswer@gmail.com. Be sure to include your first name, location, and the hashtag bonjour. Now, that's pretty funny. When I just said bonjour in what I'm sure was a terrible French accent, it reminded me of Brad Pitt on Inglourious Basterds when he's pretending to be some sort of Italian emissary or something like that, and his accent, or just his language, his Italian language in general, is absolutely terrible, and the German guy sees right through him. At one point he says, what does he say? Oh, he says, buongiorno. And obviously the German guy, the main character who was kind of the evil villain besides Hitler in the movie, he saw right through it right away and could tell that he wasn't Italian. But anyway, that just made me think of it when I said bonjour in a terrible French accent. So enough of that. Let's get into the discussion topic of this episode, which is whistleblowers. So as I was sitting at work today, and yes, I was working on the weekend, I'm recording on Sunday, I wanted to know what other people in my office thought about this. And I'll warn you, the audience that I was posing this question to, they really don't see much of a difference between whistleblowers and insider threats. So when I asked, I got all kinds of different answers. Of course, Snowden and Bradley or Chelsea Manning came up in the conversation, which you can imagine, especially with the audience that I was speaking to, like I said. So I think when it comes to distinguishing between whistleblowers and insider threats, it largely depends on whose side you're on for this. Now, my definition for insider threat, and I'm sure there's a lot of definitions out there, and I didn't bother looking it up, but mine is a person with inside knowledge or access that could have a negative impact on the organization. Now, when you think about whistleblowers, well, before we get there, I did look up the definition for whistleblower. It's a person who informs on a person or organization engaged in illicit activity. So when you think about that, if a whistleblower has a negative impact on the organization and they are considered an insider, then you could call them an insider threat. And that's regardless of the truth behind their remarks. It's regardless of their motivation behind whistleblowing. It doesn't really matter. If they can have a negative impact on the organization because of, one, their knowledge of the organization, or two, the access they have in that organization, then yes, I would call them an insider threat. Now, I'm sure a bunch of you are getting excited about that, and that's okay, because I'll go into a little bit more detail. With this, with us calling them, potential insider threats, I think it opens up a new perspective, because I hope we can all admit that some whistleblowers aren't bad. Maybe they're doing a service. If someone is highlighting some really bad, illicit, immoral activities that are going on in an organization, that's probably a good thing, depending on, whether it's true or not. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but generally, whistleblowers should be considered a good thing, because without that ability, then there are no checks against a lot of these organizations. So, with that said, how do we protect the fundamental capability that whistleblowers and whistleblowing provide, yet reduce the risk of them being an insider threat? And I think I've got a solution. I mean, this shouldn't be too surprising for most people. I think the answer is culture and communication. So, whistleblowing, theoretically, and I'm sure it's not the case, all the time, but it theoretically only happens when employees see something wrong and they feel that they can't report it. Or they feel that if they do report it, either something bad is going to happen to them, or maybe even worse, nothing will happen. So they want to go to the public with all this data and proof of their allegations, and that's when it becomes an insider threat. So if you provide a means for people to report things that they see as wrong in an organization, as long as, of course, it's not coming from the very top of the organization, but let's say it's a mid-level manager, maybe even a senior manager, but not the CEO of the company, who's doing something that is immoral or illegal, then there should be programs, processes, things in place that they can report those sorts of incidents in a way that they won't feel like they're going to lose their job over it. Like we said, generally speaking, whistleblowers are important. They can highlight some terrible things going on in organizations, but we can do things to make them not exist to begin with. Even if bad things are going on, if there's a way for them to communicate those bad things in a meaningful way that'll actually have results, then they probably won't end up being whistleblowers. They're just going to report it, and executive management can make the necessary changes to ensure that whatever bad is going on doesn't keep happening. So what do you think? I mean, I think I've successfully, and you can tell me otherwise, I think I've successfully married the two camps on whistleblowers. One, you're thinking that they're leaking data, they're insider threats, they're these terrible people. And the other camp is that, whistleblowers are great. They're highlighting all these terrible things that are going on in organizations and countries and governments and everything. I think we've found a way through culture and communication to marry those two together, to reduce the need for whistleblowers while also improving our organizations. And isn't that what we're all here for? At the end of the day, that's what everyone who's listening to this podcast either is concerned about insider threat, wants to improve, the risk associated with insider threat in their organizations. They want to make a difference. They want to learn about this thing. They want to improve the culture, everything about their organizations. So if we can find a way to reduce the number of whistleblowers because they don't feel like they need to blow whistles, I think that's a win-win for everybody, no matter whose camp you're in. So in our news segment this week, a University of Georgia student was arrested for hacking into a professor's account to change his grades. And this is for real. It kind of sounds like something that would have happened in war games, right? But there, one, it was a prank. Two, that was fiction, right? So this whole incident was discovered when an assistant professor noticed that he couldn't log into his email account, which is very common. If you've ever worked any sort of technical support, that's one of the biggest problems that people have is they don't have access to their account. They can't remember their password, their account got locked out, something like that. But when this assistant professor called the help desk, I'm assuming, and said, hey, I'm having some issues getting into my account, the technician said, well, oh yeah, it looks like you just changed your password a few days ago. And that's when the alarm bells started ringing. So Michael Williams, who was a student there, and he was also, by the way, Michael Williams worked at the school's enterprise IT building, so he did have access to these accounts. And to be honest, I think we can all agree, anybody who's worked in this environment, he probably just went in Active Directory, changed the password so that he could log in and change his grades, right? It probably wasn't that crazy of a hack. But this is a perfect example of insider threat. This was a trusted technician on the school's network who did malicious things in order to improve his own grades for self-benefit, right? So I know in the past when we've seen stories like this, a lot of people would jump up and down saying, hire that guy, he's going to be the one that helps us to protect our networks, or he's going to be the next red teamer or whatnot. But I seriously doubt in this case, when you look at all the details, that it was that much of a hack, like I said earlier. And Mr. Williams was booked for 9 counts of computer trespass and 71 counts of computer forgery. 71. I wonder how they got that number. I'm guessing they're looking at the logs, and anything that he did, and this is just a guess, all the actions, all the log outputs that happened while he was on this assistant professor's account, they're probably counting each single thing that he did as a count of computer forgery, which is interesting. So anyway, I think we've belabored that topic enough. Our closing thought for this episode comes from Jay Leno. He said, today is Valentine's Day, or, as men like to call it, Extortion Day. Thank you for listening to episode 33 of the Insider Threat Podcast. Please remember to subscribe and review in your favorite podcast app, and also share with everyone you know. Those reviews are key to building this out and improving for later episodes, so please feel free to leave suggestions. You can contact me on Twitter @Steve Higdon or send an email to steve@theinsiderthreatpodcast.com. Go to our website, www.theinsiderthreatpodcast.com, to find the show notes for this and every other episode, as well as links to the topics we've covered. You can also go to the website to find a link to the Patreon page and subscribe to the newsletter to get up-to-date information on current episodes and news for the show. Call and leave a voicemail at 443-292-2287 to have a conversation, get a comment added to the show, or even ask a question. Thanks again, and I'll see you folks next time.